There is a strange contradiction in modern personal finance. We have more information about money than any generation before us. You can watch market commentary before breakfast. You can see which shares are trending by lunchtime. You can follow people explaining the next investment opportunity, the next economic boom, the next technology revolution, the next asset class that supposedly cannot lose. And yet, having access to more financial information has not necessarily made building wealth easier. In some ways, it has made it harder, because wealth is usually built through a process that is almost boring compared with the things competing for your attention. Regular saving, long-term investing, controlling unnecessary spending, increasing earning power, diversifying, avoiding catastrophic mistakes, and staying invested long enough for compounding to have a chance to work. None of these habits require predicting what will happen in future. That matters because nobody knows what will happen in future. The most useful question for someone trying to build wealth in Britain is therefore not what is the next big opportunity. It is what financial decisions have a reasonable probability of working even when my predictions are wrong. So, in this video, we're not going to talk about which trend is real and which is not. We're going to talk about something far less exciting and far more effective: what the evidence says actually correlates with building wealth over a normal human lifetime in the UK, and why almost none of it looks like anything you'd screenshot and post. That change in perspective can completely alter how you approach money, because building wealth is less like winning a prediction contest and more like repeatedly making decisions where the odds are slightly in your favor, and then giving those decisions time. Imagine two people. The first spends several hours every week researching markets. They move money between different investments whenever the economic outlook changes. One year they are excited about technology. The next year it is commodities, then emerging markets, then artificial intelligence, then whatever the internet has decided is the next big thing. They may occasionally get something spectacularly right, but every decision creates another opportunity to be wrong. The second person has a much simpler system. They save consistently. They invest regularly. They use a diversified portfolio. They keep enough accessible cash to avoid being forced into bad decisions. They review their finances periodically rather than constantly, and when markets become exciting, they don't automatically become more active. Which person has the better strategy? Not necessarily the person who makes the most impressive prediction. The better strategy is the one where the number of things that need to go right is smaller. This is one of the most important ideas in personal finance. A robust system does not require you to be right about everything. You don't need to know which company will dominate in 10 years. You don't need to know whether markets will rise or fall next month. You don't need to know which sector will lead next year. You need a financial system that can survive your uncertainty. That is a much more achievable goal. Financial news is designed to attract attention. That doesn't make it useless, but it means you need to understand the difference between information and action. The Bank of England changes rates. Markets react. A company announces spectacular earnings. Its share price moves. A new technology becomes popular. Investors rush towards it. A recession looks more likely. People become nervous. Then 6 months later, the story changes. This creates a psychological trap. You start believing that because something important happened, you must do something about it. But those are completely different statements. Something can be economically important without requiring a change to your personal portfolio. That distinction can save you from a tremendous amount of unnecessary activity. Think about your own financial plan like a large ship. A headline is not necessarily a reason to turn the ship around. It might be interesting, it might even be important, but your financial direction should generally be determined by your objectives, time horizon, risk tolerance, and circumstances, not by whatever story is dominating social media that afternoon. This is particularly important because short-term market movements are incredibly difficult to predict consistently. The temptation is to believe that someone who predicted the last move can predict the next one. But markets don't award points for explaining yesterday. They reward the person who manages tomorrow's uncertainty. And tomorrow is where nobody has perfect information. Suppose someone invests £500 every month. They don't know whether markets will be higher or lower 6 months from now. They don't know which sector will outperform. They don't know what the economy will look like in 5 years. But they continue making contributions. Something interesting happens. When prices are high, their money buys fewer units. When prices fall, the same contribution buys more. When markets recover, those purchases made at lower prices participate in the recovery.
This doesn't eliminate investment risk, it doesn't guarantee a profit, and it certainly doesn't mean markets only move upwards. What it does is remove one enormous decision from the equation. When exactly should I invest? You don't need to identify the perfect moment every month. You have a process. And processes are useful because human beings are notoriously vulnerable to emotion. When markets rise rapidly, people can become overconfident. When markets fall sharply, people can become frightened. The same person can feel like a genius in January and a financial disaster by October, even though their underlying long-term plan has barely changed. A rules-based approach reduces the number of emotional decisions you have to make. That is not exciting, it is useful. And useful beats exciting when you are dealing with money. People often talk about making money as though the key question is how much you can make this year. But wealth accumulation is heavily influenced by the length of time your capital remains productive. Consider the difference between someone who starts investing at 25 and someone who waits until 45. The younger investor doesn't necessarily earn more, they simply have more time. That additional time gives compounding more opportunities to operate. And compounding is not just about investment returns. It can happen in several areas of life. Skills compound, experience compounds, professional reputation compounds, business relationships compound, good financial habits compound, and capital can compound. This is why chasing every trend can be counterproductive. Every time you abandon a long-term process for a new idea, you risk interrupting the very thing that makes long-term wealth accumulation powerful. The objective is not to find an investment that makes you rich quickly. The objective is to create enough productive capital maintained over enough time that relatively ordinary returns can become meaningful. That is a much more realistic proposition. The boring portfolio has one enormous advantage because it doesn't have to predict the future. Diversification is often treated as something sophisticated investors talk about. In reality, it is one of the simplest risk management ideas in finance. The FCA describes diversification as spreading investments across different products and markets so that you are less dependent on one particular investment performing well. Think about what that means. If you put everything into one company, your financial future becomes heavily dependent on that company. If you concentrate everything in one industry, you become dependent on that industry. If you concentrate everything in one country, you become more exposed to that country's economic and political environment. But when your investments are spread across different businesses, sectors, and markets, one failure doesn't necessarily become a personal financial catastrophe. Diversification doesn't make losses impossible, it makes your financial outcome less dependent on one prediction being correct. And that is exactly what we want, because the entire philosophy of trend chasing is based on prediction. You are saying, this is going to be the winner. Diversification says, I don't know which one will be the winner, so I want exposure to many potential winners. That sounds less intelligent. It can actually be more intelligent. There is a strange status game in investing. People sometimes assume that a complicated portfolio must be more sophisticated than a simple one. More funds, more accounts, more strategies, more trades, more spreadsheets, more market commentary. But complexity does not automatically create better results. Sometimes it simply creates more opportunities to make mistakes. A good financial system should be understandable enough that you know why you own something. You should know what your investments are designed to do. You should understand roughly how much risk you are taking. You should know how much cash you need for short-term spending, and you should should know what would cause you to change your plan. If you cannot explain your financial strategy without using 20 different acronyms, there is a possibility that the strategy has become more complicated than necessary. The goal isn't to make your finances impressive, the goal is to make them durable. There is another reason people get pushed into bad financial decisions. They don't have enough flexibility. Imagine your investments fall significantly at exactly the same time that you face an unexpected expense. Suddenly, you are not thinking about long-term returns, you are thinking about getting money immediately. That changes the decision. You may be forced to sell an investment at an inconvenient time. This is why cash reserves are not necessarily the enemy of wealth building. They have a job, they provide flexibility. The FCA found that 1 in 10 UK adults had no cash savings, while another 21% had less than £1,000 available for an emergency. That doesn't mean everyone needs the same emergency fund. Circumstances vary, but the principle is powerful. Financial resilience gives you the ability to make long-term decisions without being dominated by short-term emergencies. Your investments can have one job, your emergency reserves can have another, and your everyday income can fund the life happening between the two. Separating those functions can make the entire system easier to manage.
Investment returns get enormous attention because they are visible. But there is another variable that people often underestimate: how much money you can consistently put into your financial system. If you invest £100 a month, improving your investment returns slightly may help, but increasing your available monthly contribution from £100 to £300 changes the mathematics much more dramatically. That is why your earning power deserves attention, not because everyone needs to become an entrepreneur, and not because you should turn your entire life into a productivity competition, but because skills can increase the amount of capital you have available to deploy. A qualification, a professional skill, negotiation ability, technical expertise, communication, sales, management, a side business, a career move. These can sometimes produce financial benefits that dwarf the difference between choosing two reasonably similar investments. And unlike an investment trend, improving your earning capacity can give you greater control over the outcome. You can't control the market. You can influence your skills. That distinction matters. There is a second mathematical problem. Suppose your income increases, you feel richer, so your spending increases. Then income increases again, spending increases again. Eventually, you can earn substantially more without becoming substantially wealthier. This is why wealth is not simply income. Income is what comes in. Spending is what goes out. Wealth is what remains and compounds. That doesn't mean you should live miserably. Quite the opposite. Money is supposed to provide choices, but every permanent increase in spending creates a permanent claim on future pay packets. This is why one of the most powerful habits is creating a gap between what you earn and what you spend, then directing part of that gap towards assets and financial resilience. The larger that gap becomes, the more options you create. Imagine checking your portfolio every morning. You see a small rise, you feel good, then a fall, you worry. Then a recovery, you become optimistic again. After a while, your emotions start responding to tiny movements that have almost nothing to do with your long-term financial objectives. Instead, measure things you can actually control. Did you save this month? Did you invest according to your plan? Did you keep your spending within your intended range? Did you avoid unnecessary debt? Did you improve a useful skill? Did you review your financial position? Did you maintain enough liquidity for your circumstances? Those are measurable behaviors, and behavior is where your advantage exists. You cannot control the return of the market. You can control whether you continue contributing. You cannot control whether a particular company succeeds. You can control whether your portfolio is dangerously concentrated. You cannot predict the next economic shock. You can control whether your finances have enough flexibility to absorb one. This is the difference between prediction and preparation. One of the best ways to avoid financial mistakes is to make important decisions before you are emotionally pressured. There is no promise here that everyone who follows these habits will become wealthy. Life is too unpredictable for guarantees, but these habits can improve the probability of ending up in a stronger financial position than you would have reached by constantly reacting to whatever happens to be popular. If you found this useful, subscribe to the channel for more practical breakdowns of money, wealth, and financial behavior in the UK. And if you want to build wealth without constantly chasing what's trending, share this video with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the most powerful financial strategy is simply having a good plan and sticking with it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.